All right. Very nice. Today is April the 15th. If you don't know that already for having filled out your taxes, April 15th, 2024. We are doing Parshat Metzora. Normally, as I mentioned last week, these Parshiot are divided into into one. They're grouped together, Tazria Metzora. But this year, because of the leap year, these two Parshiot are separate, which means that we have a lot of time to deal with these subjects, which we normally don't deal with because we conveniently set them aside to concentrate on Passover. But I feel a certain responsibility to try and understand these things, and to really at least with the abilities that we have and the tools available and all the different studies and commentaries available to us to really try and kind of peek into the world, peek into the ancient world. I'm fascinated by this, and I think that that's kind of like the opening to this. The way to access this is to not be afraid of it, but to instead feel a great deal of curiosity and fascination by it, and to really ask the questions. Well, what is going on here? What is going on here in the focus here? What is going on in this worldview? What is going on in the world, and what's this really about? And when we ask those questions, we get some very basic answers. The basic answer is, this is about life. This is about the the focus of Israel and the orientation that the people of Israel has towards the God of Israel through the Torah of Israel, which is all focused on life. And that's a useful framework to understand, I think, almost everything in the Torah, and by extension, everything in life. Everything in Judaism. Um, for example, and we'll touch on this a little bit, the when it comes to the moment between life and death and the way that we interact with the dead, we are focused even in the moments subsequent to death. We're focused more on the living than on the dead. We're focused on taking care of the people that are alive. The mourning laws are overwhelmingly focused on the needs of the living rather than the needs of the dead, because the needs of the living outweigh the needs of the dead. So Judaism, perforce, is a religion that focuses on life and focuses on the value of life, and everything lines up with this kind of compass orientation towards life. Go ahead, Marley.
So then how, if we're going to read and take in as we read it, today when we start the Parsha of Metzora, we take a live bird and dip it in the blood of a dead bird and lift it up and then let it go, and that's life?
That's correct. Because
oh yeah, I know those facts are correct.
No,
but how do we internalize killing one bird to let another bird live?
So here we have to kind of, put the whole symbolic system together, and I'll dip into this in a moment, which is
seven times.
No,
Rabbi,
yeah,
seven
well,
times.
Both. So we have established it is intuitive for us in our context and in the context of the religious symbolic lives that we all live. We talk about water as a symbol of life, and that's obvious because without water you die. Especially obvious if you live in the desert climate or if you live in an arid climate where the necessity of drinking is a matter of life and death. And I'll just give you our example. My favorite way of trying to explains, for example, the ritual of Tashlich. At the beginning of the year, you go to a body of water, you throw out crumbs or pieces of bread, etc., as a symbolic casting of your sins. Well, the symbolism of Tashlich is I cast my sins, and the word Tashlich appears in in the book of Jonah, etc., etc. But I think there's a deeper anthropology going on here, which is that in putting people in contact with a running water, with water, and usually that water is a lake or a stream or some kind of body of water that's living, and we'll talk about that in this, at the end. While, of course, in the absence of those kinds of sources, you can also go to a well, or you can go to a covered up well. I remember in Jerusalem when I was a student there, there are no live bodies of water in Jerusalem. You really, you have to go far to find them. There are in the Judean hills, of course. So where do people in Jerusalem go to do tashlich? They go to wells that have been covered up. So I remember standing at a encapsulated well and leaving some bread there. The point is that when you go to water, you're making a contact with something living. That is to say, not an animal, but a source of life. Okay, and so that is a running theme within the whole system. That is, you're making contact with life. Now, the blood of the bird, well, the other major symbol of life is blood. And what the blood of the bird is doing is it's giving that symbol of life into the larger, into the there's a whole, it you dip, but we'll take a look at it in a second, and we'll show you all the verses for it, and I'll be able to have access to the actual text. Okay, anybody else with a preliminary question? Other than that, we will go here into my text. Here we go. So this is chapter 14 in the book of Leviticus. It's going to be a complicated chapter, but we will do our best, okay? Sorry. All right. So, God, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. That's how almost everything starts. Zot tiyeh Torah HaMetzora. This is to be the instruction regarding the one with Tzarat. Metzora is the person afflicted with this disease. Okay, the Metzora. We met the Metzora last week, the skin disease person. I showed you the scabs and the swellings, etc. I put them on my Parsha sheet this week, and I was criticized for the pictures, which only means that there are people that are very squeamish about seeing psoriasis. I happen to think it's quite beautiful, but whatever. So this is the instruction of the one Sarat. What do you do when you have this disease, and how do you overcome this? What are the rituals of transition at the time of its being purified? So we are talking about this moving between the state of having the disease, being diagnosed with the disease, being sequestered, and now having to return, being able to return to the group. Okay, so at the time of being purified, he's brought to the priest. The priest is the central ritual agent here. The priest is to go outside the camp. The priest is to look. Vira'ah Kohen, very important, the personal analysis. And here, Vine, Nirpa Negatzarat Minatzarud. The affliction, should the affliction of Tzarat have healed on the one with Tzarat, the priest is to command that they take, for the one to be purified, 2 birds, live, pure, and wood of cedar, and scarlet, and worm, of the worm and hyssop. Okay? So this is weird. This is why you are reacting to this in a way that this doesn't make sense. And I would add that part of the weirdness of it is there is a little bit of echo of the ancient past. I'm very influenced by Jacob Milgram, as you can see here. Is the cover of the book. Leviticus, it's a big fat door stopper of a book, okay? And and this is only one volume of Leviticus. You can see that it's like, I don't know, what, 1,000 pages on this. I think that it's possible to do a course on every single, chapter or verse. I mean, I keep thinking, like, if I would have ever done a PhD in Bible, I would say a great seminar paper would to take one verse, one comment of Jacob Milgram that goes on for 3-5 pages. Find all the source material, find all the articles, whatever, read them all, and disagree with him. Okay. Anyway, so he says that th this is a snapshot, basically, and that there's something behind this. And what's behind this are rituals that are even more ancient, and rituals that come from most likely a pagan source. And that these things have such power over the people that what we get is a conflict. We get a conflict between the pagan origins of some of these rituals, which have a pagan narrative, and the monotheism and the ethics of the biblical system, which wants to have nothing to do with the pagan origins, but yet wants to preserve in some way the ritual structure in order to satisfy the need of the people and possibly the need of the protagonists, namely the priests. I think this is a fascinating idea that that and it speaks to I think a very deep truth, which is that people like their rituals. They are human beings are highly ritualized people, and they like doing things the same way over time. Admittedly, with small changes here and there, okay, but they get tremendous satisfaction out of the continuity of that. And as far as Jews are concerned, they want to bring it into the Jewish context. I'll give you a good example. Let me just stop sharing for a second and give you an example of this, which is from the American context. Okay, I'm just going to plug my thing in. I'm getting a little battery. The American context, there is a holiday that universally all Americans celebrate, and I would say, I would guess all Jews or most Jews celebrate, which is Thanksgiving. Uh, Everybody has a Thanksgiving of some sort. Okay, so the question is, to what extent have Jews Judaized Thanksgiving, or to what extent Jews have refrained from Thanksgiving? So if Jews say we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving, basically they're saying we're going to take a holiday that originates from the secular realm, American civic life, American civil religion, basically, and we're going to incorporate it into our own lives and make meaning out of it in any way possible, whether it's at the very least just a meal. Okay. The fact that Jews say we're going to do this together also means that they've in fact Judaized it. My favorite conversation on this was with Rabbi Hilzerath, who said he loved Thanksgiving. Why? Because it was the only holiday where everybody could get together and they could drive, freely and not have to worry. And they could make a big feast, and they could, it was an excuse to get together. To me, that's a very Judaized statement, which is saying, here the rest of the country is getting together and celebrating. We're going to celebrate, we don't, the narrative, not the narrative, whatever, but we're a family. And so this becomes the family way of getting together in a secular framework. And so you see then that I would say even there, from an anthropological perspective, Jews have Judaized Thanksgiving to the extent that they've incorporated it. I would go one step further, which is, when the American Jewish Committee published a couple of years ago, and this is not the first time that an organization published a Haggadah for Thanksgiving, what are they saying? They're saying we're going to take an apparatus, an instrumentality that's Jewish, and we're going to donate that to America. And hopefully, in the recitation of the Thanksgiving Haggadah, not only Jews, but all Americans who want access to a structured ritual narrative of their Seder for Thanksgiving could have some kind of liturgy or some kind of script to go by. Susie, go ahead.
So first of all, there are unfortunately in the Haredi world people who don't celebrate Thanksgiving because they say.
Correct.
On the other, Rabbi Riskin said that one should make kiddush on.
Can't hear her.
You can't hear her?
Can
Now
you-
you can't hear. Go ahead. Suck again, Susie. Go ahead.
Yeah. Is this better, Barbara? All right. So
I can hear her fine.
yeah. All
Okay,
right.
good.
So yeah. So there are people who in the Haredi world who don't
Yeah,
because they say it's goyish and we don't do that.
right.
But Rabbi Riskin, who used to live in New York, said that one should make kiddush on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so it's a perfect example. I'll give you,
Hodu Lashem.
indeed. Okay.
Yeah.
So would that mean, I mean, I don't recall if here I certainly recall at the seminary that on Thanksgiving we did not recite Tachanun on a Thursday morning of Thanksgiving, right? And I've brought that to the shul, although I don't know how consistent we are. I'm pretty sure we don't say Tachanun on Thanksgiving. We don't say Tachanun on all civic holidays. Any excuse not to say Tachanun we'll use. But even that, as a footnote, is a way of Judaizing, a Thanksgiving. To go to the extent of Kiddush. So what all you need basically is a liturgy. You can say Bore Priagafen anytime you want, even if you're, having a lunch, here's a glass of wine,
Yeah.
Bore Priagafen.
I
Right?
came up with something.
Okay, so there you go.
I came up with a pasuk, because we
Go
have
ahead.
these themes. So it's Ukratam Dror
Nice.
Ba'aretz L'chol
You
Yoshveha.
shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all your inhabitants. Okay, so that's a perfect way of Judaizing something, and
Maybe that's more for July 4th, but
exactly. No, in the Israeli context, by the way, there are people who say Kiddush on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Ha'atzmaut as a secular holiday, but having a religious dimension. My point is that the people, ritual is very satisfying, and even if ritual comes outside of our Jewish context, it enters the world, and so Jews have Judaized it, and that is what I think Milgram is saying. He's saying that these things were left over; these things are part of a pagan past, and yet they have captivated the imagination of the adherents, and the architects of the priestly rites here, specifically because of a very important human need, which is, as we saw last week, you take this individual suffering from the scale disease, you put them outside the camp, the individual has been engaged in the rituals of self-mourning, and then that period is over. So then how do you welcome that individual back? So you need something that's more than just, more than just standing at the doorway on a Friday night, after L'chadodi. I'm making reference to a ritual that we do, which is that a person in the week of Shiva who comes to shul on the Friday night for Kabbalat Shabbat, you don't sit Shiva from Friday night to Saturday night, but if the mourner is able to, the mourner is supposed to come to shul to be able to recite Kaddish. The mourner doesn't wear the torn clothing, but the mourner in the week of Shiva is still experiencing tremendous sadness. So the custom has been that the mourner stays outside of the synagogue or outside the chapel during Kabbalat Shabbat, which is the more festive, singing time. And then at the end of L'cha Dodi, the end of the Kabbalat Shabbat, basically, prior to the recitation of the Sabbath Psalm, Psalm 32, the mourner is welcomed into the congregation through, the greeting of comfort. That's a very important ritual that establishes, the way I like to interpret it is, it establishes that at the moment of the heightened anticipation of the arrival of Shabbat, you are now concerned about the person who's lowest in your community, who has gone through a terrible loss, or who is now in experiencing, the deepest sadness. So the height of joy meets the depth of sadness. It's a very profound moment, in my opinion, um, and that effectuates the way that we take a person back into the community. Okay. Another example, again, with mourning is, so at the end of mourning, at the end of Shiva, Shiva is over, and you get up from Shiva, and you are supposed to walk, you walk around the block. Or it's not written anywhere. There's nowhere where this is written, but that's the custom. Why? The custom is very simple. It's you're going back into the world. You're going back to the world. And so without taking turtle dove, or without taking birds and dipping them into blood, and without flying them out, we don't do that anymore, but we do need to have a vocabulary of symbolic activity in order to reclaim our place within the community. That this is so true in the case of loss. It's so true in the case of people who experience trauma. I think that, some of the things that are going on in Israel now are touching these things, how do you go back to certain things after the pandemic, to a certain extent, and I don't want to say we're still in it, because, short of a declaration that it's over, which we kind of did several times anyway. So I was very mindful of this, the saying, this is the first time back to this. This is what we're doing for, here's our first time without, and all of that, which is very, very important in a sense to say to people, we're making the transition, because transitions from one state to another are so important, no matter if it's life and death, no matter if it's disease and wholeness. It's, and it's mourning and regular life being back, or even, being single and married, or married, divorced, etc. All of these things are transitions from one state to another state, and they need various forms of acceptance. So that's what's happening. That's the need that's crying out for a ritual commemoration. And it just so happens that the vocabulary that's available to our ancestors is borrowed from the pagan lexicon, okay, which is the birds. The birds in paganism flew off elsewhere to other gods, okay? Now, there are no other gods but the one God, so you can't have birds flying off to other gods, okay? But what you can do is have the birds basically taking something and symbolizing that they're taking something away with them, and they're transferring back to the individual a sense that there is life here and that the person is reborn. I'll go inside the verses, and then we'll have an analysis with Jonathan Grossman again. So they take these two birds, they're wild birds. They're not pigeons or turtle doves. And the reason for that, I'm just going to close it for a second. Why wouldn't they be pigeons or turtle doves? What do you think? Unmute if you have an answer.
Pigeons live in New York.
Pigeons live in New York. Okay, I'll tell you why. Okay, I over the last few months, every morning, I have two little birds. They come and they sit on my little porch, outside my kitchen. And unfortunately, I think there's only one now. But for a long time, there were two birds there. And what's the deal with pigeons? Pigeons are homing animals. Pigeons have a home instinct, okay? And that's why you use pigeons for messaging, and use pigeons as homing aids, okay? the difference between a pigeon and a wild bird is that a wild bird does not have the potential of coming back. So if you take a bird that's a wild bird, let's say a sparrow or other kind of bird, other than a pigeon or a dove, and you dip them into this blood water and you throw them out, they're not going to come back. I was on, last time I visited Israel before October 7th. So it was last year we went to this place. It's called the Salad Trail, and in this they have a birding area, and the idea was you take the bird and you throw the bird up, and the bird comes back right at you, because they're pigeons. Anyway, so that's the birds, and here we could continue. So, and the wood of the cedar, the scarlet, these are red devices. Red is, you'll see what red is in a second. Vitziva Kohen, the priest's command that they slay one bird in an earthen vessel held above the living water. So they slaughter it. They take the live bird and the cedar wood and the scarlet of the worm and the hyssop, and they dip him and the live bird in the blood of the slaughtered bird held above the living water. Okay, and the reason for this is because there's not going to be a lot of blood from a bird that's slaughtered, so the blood has to the redness has to be diluted into, it has to be full, so that there can be enough to cover the bird basically, and so he is to sprinkle it over the one to be purified of Torah. It takes this, okay, and say, I'm the one that has this disease or that had it. I'm being sprinkled, which is the detergent, okay, 7 times, which is the ritual creation number. Declare him pure, and it is to send out the live bird into the open field. Bye-bye, you're gone, and you take all the impurity that has been transferred onto you, and you are taking it beyond you, okay? With my earphones, okay? You're taking it beyond you. And then the one being purified is to scrub his garments, shave his entire head of hair, wash his water, and afterwards he may enter the camp. He stays outside of his tent. V'yashav michutz la'olo shivat yamin. We're going to look at this in a second in more depth. So he gets his ticket back into the area. However, he's not going into his home. Okay? So what does that mean? Okay? Let's say he's a man and his tent. Who lives in his tent?
His family.
His family. More likely his wife. Okay? So this is a euphemism for he can go there, but he can't resume a natural marital life yet. There's still another period of time that he has to do this, okay? So then there are other rituals. I'm going to breeze through the other. So on the 7th day, shave all his hair, head, beard, eyebrows, all his body hair he used to shave, okay? And this is odd because we thought here we are, hirsute men, okay, that this is the ideal, that, the ideal is to have a beard, and the ideal is to, you don't shave, and you shouldn't use a razor. So this seems to be very odd. I've always found this very, very odd, but I have an explanation for it coming up. And then it's a barbecue, okay? It takes 2 lambs, sound, 3 tenths of measure, blah, blah, blah. This is the menu of purification offerings, okay? And we don't have to go through all of this. You slaughter the lamb, place the lamb, 14, then the priest takes on the blood of the Asham offering. There's lots of sacrificing going on, and oil and sprinkling, etc. Okay, and the priest is to make chatat offerings, and if he's poor, turtle doves. I'm going to just breeze through it and go. So he has the most interesting part of this is the birds, and the second most interesting part of it is that he gets to go back into the camp, and the third most interesting part is he still has to stay outside his tent, and then there are rituals that allow him to make the transition from the camp into his home, and then there are rituals that enable him to go make the transition from his home and appear before the sanctuary. So there you can almost imagine that the system is constructed with concentric circles. The furthest radius is you're outside of the circumference, okay? You're in orbit around the circumference of the camp, okay? I'm using circumference, the camp is a rectangle, but you're outside of that orbit. You're in Netherland, okay? And then you come into the camp, you've traversed the boundary, but you're in the camp, but you're not in your home. And then you come into your home, but you're not yet allowed to come into the sanctuary. And then you come into the sanctuary. So you're making all of these different transitions from outside to the inside, and to the most inside, which is not your home or your bedroom, but the sanctuary where you're able to live your life as a full Israelite with God. Okay? And then the priest is to place them. There's all sorts of dabbing and daubing, and sacrificing whatever his hand can reach, the chatat offering, the other offering up on the grain drift, and the priest is to effect purgation of the one being purified before the presence. The last line, which is Zot Torat Asher Bo Negatzarat Asher Lo Tasig Yado B'Torah. This is the instruction, the one who has an affliction of Sarat, whose hand cannot reach means of purification. Of course, all of those sacrifices and the dipping of oil, etc., they're all important. But what to focus for a second, we want to focus on the living waters and also this idea of shaving. But I have a question here. I'm going to stop sharing. Go ahead, Steve Parkoff. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to take issue with the issue of a wild bird.
Okay.
I think they were all cultivated birds. All around Jerusalem, there have been found dovecotes, the places where you build a building and you have holes in the walls,
Right.
where they actually cultivated birds, and the birds were brought to the temple or sold as offerings. So I think that these are either doves or pigeons, maybe doves instead of pigeons, but they were definitely raised, and it was a big industry in ancient Jerusalem.
Well, you are correct that doves and birds were cultivated for temple offerings for the sake of those people who could not afford larger animal offerings. However, you're not correct in this particular instance. Sorry, Steve. Okay, because in this particular instance, it's very clear that these birds, especially the bird that gets slaughtered, is not a sacrifice. The bird is not a sacrifice. And the bird that is thrown off is not a domesticated bird, because if it were a domesticated bird, it would bring back the impurity that it's designed to fly away to. You're supposed to send it out to the field where it's supposed to take all the schmutz with it out of you, okay? So it's not a sacrificial bird, so therefore it wouldn't be cultivated and penned, or cooped, basically. And B, it has a ritual function, which only wildness can satisfy, and that is also there's another element here that makes it similar to, let's say, the scapegoat, which is a sacrifice. So there's Jacob Milgram comments on this in his book, and he's very, very clear about this. This is about taking the wild, not the domesticated. Okay. All right. I want to go into some of the analysis of this. Okay. And this is the again, my favorite commentator on this is Jonathan Grossman. So he says there's three stages. We talked about this a little bit. Hashiva el hamachaneh, the return to the camp. That ritual is, that is brought about by the ritual of bringing the two birds. The return to the tent or his wife, that is accomplished by waiting, and then Hashiva Mishkan, that's accomplished by making all the sacrifices that I just breezed through. Okay, so he says in his comment, he says look, I didn't translate it word for word here, but he says, look, I want to concentrate on the first return to the community, that a person is returning to the community, v'shav l'chaim kihilatiyim. This person is coming back to communal life, that there was a symbolic death in being outside of the community, and the transition, the return to life is the what's being revealed here, or what's being ritualized here. When the Kohen goes out and sees that he's been healed, the Torah describes this transition in a chiastic way. Now, we could spend time on chiasma. We talked about it in the past. Chiasma is this basically ABBA form, or sometimes it's much more elaborate, ABCCDA, ABCDEFG, GFEDCBA, right? So you have a chiasma here. And look at this. I've tried to illustrate this in this table, right? So that the way that the text is set up makes it nicely packaged, okay? There's a line. The Kohen has to take the 2 live birds, and at the end we have the sending of one of the wild birds. Then you have the living waters. One bird has to be slaughtered onto the pottery on living waters, that is flowing waters, and then has the companion and wild bird. In other words, this text is set up in such a way that the chiasma of the text means that it's a highly organized and structured ritual with a highly organized and structured menu. Okay, then what's going on here with the living birds? We have these are the pairs of the different chiasmas. I'm just gonna, okay. So here's what Grossman says. Mahi mashmuto shel tekaseh. What's the meaning of this ritual? Barur, it's clear. Shatziporim enam mahavot korban. That the birds are not the sacrifice. Sheherei ein enan nishchatot. They're not slaughtered next to the side of the altar. Ve'enan mukravot. They're not brought to the altar. Madua. Why? Why do they take the bird and slaughter it on living waters or flowing waters? And why? Tovlim et chaverta b'dama. Why do they take one of the bird, the live bird, and dip it into the blood water? And then why do they send it out? Domani, he says, the key here to me, the word that connects all of this is life. The key word is life. Kol mashma'uto shel hatekes hazeh niutza ba'avar mimavet l'chaim. The meaning of the ceremony is to transition from death to life. Ledato hamichudeshet shel hametzora. The new birth of the Metzora, asher mevakesh lekanes shuv el hamachaneh, who wants to go back to the camp. We're not going to go into every detail here, okay? The point is that he wants to go back to life. The function of the water is he is taking blood and he's basically coloring the water with redness, okay? The function is to color the water or dye the flowing water, losif lahem dam tzipor, adding to it the blood of the bird, umitoch adumiyut zo, and out of this redness, bokat uforachat hatzipur hachaya mushlachat al pnei hasadeh. The bird goes out to the field. He says, laniutati is, in my humble opinion, hatzeva ha'adom kol kach merkazi. The red color is so central in this ritual because it is in contrast to the whiteness that the whiteness, which was the symptom, the predominant symptom of this person afflicted with scale disease in the height of his illness. If you recall, his skin turns white, he turns pale, he looks like a living corpse. The whiteness was connected to the paleness of death. The redness is connected to blood, meaning life. Kamur, as we say, ki adamu anefesh. Blood is life. The live bird, hatzipora chaya, hamushlachat me'ad mimiyuta mayim badam, sent with the redness of the red water, meyatzeget adam she'itaher mitzirato. He stands in for the individual who's purified of the scale disease, hachozer lachayim v'shav lichyot b'tochachei hachebra l'tzadach shina, so that he can go back and live with the community in proximity to God. And then, this is what's so fascinating. Miad lachar tekese, after this ritual, mitzvah Torah, lafoch et Metzora shitpareh liyeled katan. Afterwards, the Torah commands that this individual is be transformed into a little boy. And yeled katan here is like a newborn. And this is the meaning. V'chibes, he washes his clothes. V'gilachet kol saro, he shaves all his hair. V'rachatz b'mayim b'teher, washes in the water and is purified. And then he enters the camp. Anu murgalim b'tefillah, we understand immersion. Ulam, madu hayam Metzora legalechet kol saro, why do you have to shave? K'chol hanireh, evidently, ze bitui shel leida mechudeshet. This is an expression of renewal and rebirth, or as Christians say, he's born again. He's born again. The person bursts forth anew in the air and the world and seeks to live. The exit from the immersion waters, lelo sara, without hair, a single hair on his body, recalls the birth of a baby. In the context here of birth and death and symbolic death and mourning, we should see the Metzora as one who has been purified, someone born anew. This is pretty awesome, okay? This is, and you can see how this touches the deepest recesses of human consciousness, okay? Because you want to be able to express a rebirth. So, which means that in the symbolic structure of these, in this world, having this disease is akin to being dead. But you didn't die, and you came back to life, and you are purified. And so the person goes on this journey. The journey is reflected in a narrative, which is, I got this disease. I got this disease because I incurred God's anger. I incurred God's anger because I violated the community, and I had to stand outside the community. I paid my price. I mourned for myself. I disheveled my hair. I tore my clothes. I was a slob. I'm back in the community. I'm going to shave my hair. I'm going to clean my clothes, and I'm going to be immersed in water and emerge as a newborn. Okay, it's hard for us to really understand this because Judaism, I think, took an aversion to shaving altogether. Okay, and so the idea that you would shave and then, let's say, in the modern equivalent, shave before going to the mikvah. That doesn't happen. We don't remove hair before going to the mikvah. Okay, but we do retain the idea that a person who goes to the mikvah is akin to a person who is experiencing a rebirth. The thing that both for women and men who go to the mikvah, the care is taken to remove all impediments to the water coming into contact with the skin, with the exception you don't shave, okay? So, for example, to immerse in a mikveh, you do have to cut your nails. You do have to make sure that there's no adhesions to your skin, no band-aids, for example. I have some interesting stories about that. I once took a teenager to the mikveh for conversion, and he was kind of shy, and it was a male teenager, and he had a band-aid on his thigh, and I said, you have to take your band-aid off to get into the mikveh, can't have anything coming in between the water and your skin. He was a little embarrassed because he had a little tattoo there. So I said, don't, just take it off. That's it. I think he didn't want his father to see that he had a tattoo there. At any rate, he immersed, and that was that. But he didn't have to shave his body hair, okay? And that's distinct. So I think we can still get away with saying symbolically that by going to the mikveh, you are reborn, without saying to someone, go and take a razor and shave your entire body. That is not what's called for. I mean, that would require all sorts of details, not necessary. Okay, it's bad enough that for men who get their annual cardiogram, you have to shave parts of your chest so that the thing could adhere. So the stickers go, and it's rather uncomfortable. At any rate, that's what's going on here. The person who is experiences this is born again. Now, I want to just spend the last remaining moments on this whole notion of Mayim Chaim. And this is where I would go with this. I think I'm very, I find the idea fascinating. We'll see if it will appear on a Parsha sheet near you in the coming week. But the whole idea of Mayim Chaim, it pops up in Tanakh several times. I have a few interesting examples of that. I could have done this as a kind of quiz, okay? For my next year's Passover Jeopardy, I'll put this as a category. But it's very hard. These are very, very hard references. Most people would not immediately identify these. So, Vayachperu avdei Yitzchak benachal vayimtzeu sham be'er mayim chayim. Isaac's servants also dug in the wadi and found there a well of living water. What is that? It's the story, right? They're having this altercation around Beersheba, and Isaac's servants are basically digging new wells, and they come into contact with they create a well of living water. What's a well of living water, by the way? A well of living water. Anybody want to take a crack at that? What does that mean? A well of living water?
Fresh water, not stagnant.
Exactly. It's basically they've dug into an aquifer, okay, or something like that, an underground stream. I was reading something recently. How many of our communities, prior to development and urbanization, I think it's fascinating to know how many streams there were, and how engineers and planners have had to basically, dig, in building roads, for example. Well, a road covers a stream. You have to channel the stream into a culvert, and sometimes the culverts get covered over, and sometimes these are underground. The article was on the CBC. I was just dipping into this. Toronto has hundreds and hundreds of these streams and other kinds of small creeks, basically. And when the city started to develop, the engineers are basically saying, look, what do we do with all this groundwater? And if you drive on Route 1 a lot, you'll see that over the last several years, there's been a lot of development, and all the development especially where the big Costco is, there's big, huge runoff ponds. Why is that? I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I'm just guessing that the reason for this is because when you pave over acres and acres and acres of land, the water's got to go somewhere, okay? And if you don't want Route 1 to be flooded and to, stop traffic after a small rainstorm, then you better put some kind of lake there or some kind of pond there. And interesting, every single one of them has a fountain inside. Why do they have a fountain? Well, simple, because they keep the water aerated so that it won't develop algae, because stagnant water will develop all sorts of growth and attract all sorts of, pests and everything. And this keeps it going. And I'm sure there are people that their job is to maintain that the water has to be at a certain pH. They have to test the water periodically. And that's living water. That's kind of living water. And we, those of us who live close to the river experience this after every rainstorm, because your basements flood. And the reason why is because there's just there's a water table and there are lots of underground streams. So digging a well puts you in contact with living water. Okay, that's another example. Of course, living water is not only something that is tangible, but Jeremiah, kishtayim raot asami oti azvu mikor mayim chayim lachsov lahem borot nishparim asher lo yachilu hamayim. For my people have done a twofold wrong. They have forsaken me, the fount of living waters, and hewed out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot even hold water. Well, you gotta love Jeremiah, who basically says, who's the fount of living waters? Duh, God. God is the source of everything that's alive. And so now we move from the actual, the well, the living source, to the metaphysical, that is God. God is the source of all life. And so a metaphor for that would be that God is the fount of all living, all water. Okay. And then a last quote from Zechariah. Vaya bayom ahu yetzem mayim chayim Yerushalayim, chetziam el hayam hakadmoni, vetziam el hayam hacharon b'kayitz v'choref yiyeh. In that day, fresh water shall flow from Jerusalem, part of it to the eastern sea, part of it to the western sea, throughout the summer and winter. And what's that about? So this is mythology, in a sense. And Zechariah is tapping into a very important piece of Israelite, Judite mythology, which is that Jerusalem sits on the fount of water that floods the whole world. And so this seeps into the idea of Sukkot as the water festival. And a lot of the imagery around Sukkot, which is temple imagery, is designed to elicit from the mythical Jerusalem the flooding of water that will flood the land, that will irrigate the land, because the land is so desperate for irrigation in that critical season, the season of rain. So Jerusalem, part of the mythology of Jerusalem is that it sits on these underground streams, or streams that emerge, and that Jerusalem is the source of water, and that what Zechariah is saying, in the Messianic era, Jerusalem will be the source of water that will irrigate the world to the east, the Eastern Sea, which is a reference to, I'm guessing, Yam HaMelech, and the Western Sea, which is a reference to the Mediterranean Sea. And so Jerusalem will irrigate the whole world. Now, is he talking about water, or is he talking about knowledge of God? So you could say both, really, that it's actually literal and symbolic, and that what he's trying to say is that the living water is the connection of people to God, that God is the source of life, and that's been metaphorized as water. Let me see if I have any other details here. And that is okay. Oh yes, okay. So this is Milgram, and a long comment on Be'er Mayim Chayim, or living water. The waters are called living because they flow perpetually and do not cease, like the living being whose movements never cease. Thus, water from a cistern would be invalid. the biblical writer distinguished between those two sources of water could be derived from the expression mayan uvor mikveh mayim, a spring or cistern in which water is collected. By contrast, a cistern in which water is not collected by rain or drawn water, but into which water flows from an underground source, that is, an artesian well, would certainly pass muster. That would be the well of Isaac. This can be derived from the explicit statement that Isaac's servants digging in the wadi found a ber mayim chayim. Water, or some other liquid, was obviously needed because the blood of the bird would have been insufficient for dipping the required materials plus the live bird into it. But why the necessity for spring water? Spring water is required in two other purificatory rituals: for genital discharges, later in the Parsha, and corpse contamination in the book of Numbers. The spring water is also a common element, leads to suspicion that, like other ingredients mentioned, spring water was an essential element of the original purification rite prior to its incorporation into the priestly system, and that its function in its pagan setting was, together with the other ingredients, to exorcise the disease from the patient. To be sure, things are no longer the same in the priestly text. The patient is already cured. What then is the function of these same ingredients here? Although it is subsequently stated that the ritual has purified him, it will turn out that nothing of the sort has happened. Nonetheless, the explicit wording of the text is in controversial admission that originally at one time purification did occur. There's the last piece of this, which is the episode that we read last week in the Haftorah with Naaman. Naaman, the Aramean general, is told by Elisha, God's prophet, to go bathe 7 times in the Jordan. Your flesh will be restored. It shall be pure. And he does that. And interestingly enough, here, he went down to immerse himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the agent of God had bidden, and his flesh became like a little boy's, and he was pure. And so that brings it kind of all circle, which is that there's something going on here. There's something going on here. That idea that immersion will give you a rebirth, and that Naaman didn't shave his body, but something happened there that was miraculous, so that all of his skin disease, his terrible, scale disease, instantly removed, restored to normalcy. Not only normal, but it was so pure, like it was an infant's. And so that is such a very deep theme here that's very powerful, and that you just can't, excise because, well, it smacks of pagan origins. It speaks to something very deep. And so instead of kind of saying, I'm going to be, frum about this and not take anything from my pagan past, I'm going to Judaize it, and I'm going to incorporate this into a ritual that will be very, very meaningful and have a new narrative in it. The new narrative being the transition from death to life, from Mavet to Chayim. And that is the essential narrative that's going on here in this text. Okay? I want my things off. All right, now, listen. All right. How are we doing with that? Go ahead, Bob.
Thank you. I wonder if you could put back the text where the dipping of the birds and, all the myrtle and all the other stuff come on. Never having learned any of this growing up, it's given me the opportunity to see complementary interpretations to the one you've mentioned. And I just wanted to offer the following, because as I read this, along with the social death and the mourning, there's a whole set of parallel interpretations that are not mystical, but they are a different symbolism. As we talked about with Lashon Hara being one of the potential causes of spiritual leprosy, along with arrogance and stinginess and jealousy, some of the things I learned about is that the selection of the 2 birds chirp a lot.
Uh-huh.
So the chirping that takes place, if you sacrifice the wrong kind of speech, that one of the symbols of the birds is that it in fact represents speech in different ways. And then if it go up a little higher, the cedar, I believe, is the largest tree.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Which is about arrogance, of being haughty. Okay. And the myrtle is the lack of humility and being smaller. And
Dove.
living water, some things I read that was a symbol of the Torah itself.
Yeah, of course.
So the idea of the birds flying, one being sacrificed, is to stop the Lashon Hara, but that doesn't mean you shut your mouth and can't talk generally. The bird can fly all over the place. On top of that, then the issue of the shaving of the hair, this blew me away when I heard about it. Since haughtiness is sort of the top of the head, you shave the scalp. The eyebrows, you're dealing with what you look, what you covet, how you think about things, and the beard is close to the mouth. So again, as all this is taking place, and then the sprinkling of everything, one goes to the ear, one goes to the thumb, one goes to the feet. What do you do to plug up your ears from hearing Lashon Hara and changing your own growth and development with all this? So it's a very interesting set of discussions. And the final piece, now here's where, and I don't do gematria, but
Okay.
one rabbi took the word Sippur and said it's the same number as Shalom. And so the whole
Right.
idea is bringing peace between people again through teshuva and through purification, which is presumably a public ritual, is bringing people together again as part of the process.
Right.
Anyway,
So
interesting psychological analysis.
absolutely. As you mentioned, all of these, equations basically between the symbols and what they, are interpreted. I'm reminded of the four species at Sukkot, and how there are each symbol has numerous layers of interpretation, numerous analogs basically. The lulav and etra can simultaneously mean X, Y, and Z, etc. And there's no limit to the creativity and imagination in terms of interpreting, what these things can mean. I tend to go back to the kind of the reference to the thumb, the toe, the ear. These are things that are at the outside of the body. You can't, ideally you would want to dip the whole body in a kind of purifying thing, but that would be very difficult, costly, and messy. So what you do is you do it symbolically. You do it with the thumb, the ear, and the toe, and in doing that, you kind of make the person into a walking altar, okay? Because you're supposed to put, these a sprinkling on the corners of the altar. Well, a person doesn't have corners, okay? So it's the most corner that you could have is an earlobe and a thumb and a toe. That's my take. Go ahead.
One other
Sorry.
thing I wanted to say is with the leprosy on the house.
Yes, that's
The
next.
commentary there was whether or not, just like you can have a lack of shalom bayit and a lack of it in the community, the Kohen is going in not just to look at the walls, but is really
Indeed.
finding out about the social dynamics in
Sure.
the family and with the neighbors. And so it becomes a purification, not just of the individual,
Very
but of
nice.
the whole group.
Sheldon.
Unfortunately, Bonnie got called away for a phone call, but she wanted to take issue with your statement that birds don't return. We've had a birdhouse in our backyard for at least 25 years, and the same bird and their progeny keep coming back to the same birdhouse. And in fact, when that birdhouse fell apart, I built the birdhouse in the same dimensions so that they would find their house when they came back. And we're still awaiting their return this spring. They haven't come back yet, but we've been very fortunate to have them there. And they do produce 2 different broods, sometimes of 7 or more. And we're very delighted to see them each year.
Well, that's nice. Okay. So, it's worth investigation, in terms of what kinds of species do this are more prevalent in this, and what kinds of species do not. And that would be, if we had a ancient Kohen here, that would be one of the list of questions to ask, which is, did you take a bird? it would seem that part of the system relies on taking this out of here and giving it to a bird that is going to become, eaten basically, and not a predatory bird, obviously, but a bird that would be someone's prey. And that way the bird gets, it vanishes and it goes back to the ecosystem. So, okay. Well, speaking of the ecosystem, our ecosystem consists of Passover. So we're not on next week because it's Erev Passover, and that's just not going to be a good day for anybody. And then the following week is still Pesach, is Yontiv. So we will be back in, God willing, 3 weeks. That's it. Everybody have a beautiful Pesach.